Okay, let's look at audit event notification relay. So here in this case, what we're going to look at is audit dispatcher uh, daemon. It's another daemon that controls the dispatcher functionality. The auditing system allows the external application to access and use the audit daemon in real time. Like this feature is provided by the so-called audit dispatcher, which allows, for example, like intrusion detection system to use audit D to receive enhanced detection information. This has been handled by the audit dispatcher daemon, uh, that is the audit D, which controls the audit dispatcher. It is normally started by the audit D, and it takes audit events and distribute them to the other programs that wants to analyze them in the real time. And most of the configuration of the dispatcher is been configured through this configuration file, that is auditdisk.conf file present in the etc audit disk directory. So to understand more how this audit dispatcher interact with the audit daemon and the kernel, let's have a look at the audit system components again to understand the different components. That is, as we have seen, that the audit system is made up of user space utilities, audit daemon, and the tools, and the kernel side system processing. So here in this case, we see that the audit framework is being divided into kernel component and the application component. So basically, the kernel components, the kernel part of the audit system contains the database with rules to specify the events that must be recorded. Like if a certain event happens and the kernel decides as per the database that it must be audited, a message is sent to the audit daemon for further processing. And the audit daemon can store the event message in the log file for further inspection, and also based on the configuration it might forward the event messages to the other dispatcher if they are being configured. And the communication between the user land processes and the kernel is performed with the help of the netlink socket. So here in this diagram we see that this communication between the kernel and RDD that happens to the netlink socket. And this way, the kernel part and the userland parts of the audit mechanism is mutually dependent on each other. So going back to the audit dispatcher, the tools other than the daemon that interacts with the kernel is the audit dispatcher daemon and the audit control tool that we have seen previously. So audit dispatcher daemon is basically an audit event multiplexer, and this audit dispatcher daemon interact with the audit daemon itself and sends the events to the other child applications for further processing. So the purpose of this daemon is to provide a plugin mechanism so that the real-time analytical programs can interact with the audit events. The child program installs the configuration files in the plugin directories that has been specified, that is present in etc audit plugins.d directory, where all the configuration files are present for the different plugins that are supported. And the main configuration file for this audit dispatcher is auditdisk.d.conf is the file that controls the configuration of the audit event dispatcher. So if you want to take a look at that, so this is the file that defines the various configuration parameters for the audit dispatcher. So here, this is the file, and then like if the audit dispatcher is supporting the number of plugins, then those plugins are present in the audit disk plugin.d file. So here, if we look at this, So here we see that there are different configuration files supported for various plugins, and one of the plugin that is can be used is like if the events are to be collected over the network via the audit dispatcher. So the audit dispatcher daemon can be configured to forward the log events to the remote server using the audit dispatcher remote plugin, which is included as part of this audit dispatcher plugins package. And to get this remote plugin activated and enabled, what we have to do is we have to configure the audit dispatcher plugin and update the audit dispatcher remote.conf file with the appropriate values specifying the address, IP address of the remote server, the port parameters, and the other parameters. Once the configuration is done, the activation can be done with by enabling the certain parameters such as parameter called as active parameter equal to s inside the file that is a plugins configuration file for remote logging, that is au remote.conf file. So once that is done, that gives us the gives the indication that the plugin is ready to be activated. And so once to get that plugin in the active state, we can get that done by restarting the audit service as such. So if you look back again into this remote configuration, so here in this case, it contains the various parameters that based on the remote plugin requirement, and then we have to tell activate. By default it is not in active state. We have to change this active value equal to s, and then once that is done, that plugin will be available for use. And the other parameters that we have seen seen in the where we should specify the remote server port, what is the port it will be listening to, along with the other configuration that we have seen as part of the audit deconf as well, like the number of records and number of files and the other parameters. So this way it is using this configuration that helps us to configure the different plugins that are being present. So with this, we have got the understanding how the audit subsystem can be used to track the events that is happening on the system, and it can be used to store the events on the local hard disk and the log files, as well as it can be passed on to other applications, dispatcher programs that might be running on the local system, as well as that can be forwarded to the remote network by enabling the remote audit plugin setup.